Jim Murphy, welcome.
Good evening, Sally.
The polls. Let's assume all the usual health warnings, and we know there's tactical voting to come and undecideds and so on. But the polls are dreadful, and they're increasingly dreadful for Labour. Tell me this, why do you think that your traditional Labour supporters are deserting you in such droves?
Well, you are right in saying the polls are difficult for the Scottish Labour Party.
Why, though?
And across the UK, it's really tight, of course, between Labour and the Tories.
Why are you being deserted? I would quite like to get your analysis of this. Why you think it's happening?
If you don't mind, I will do the post-match analysis after the election. I'm going to try and continue to campaign and will with huge amount of energy for the type of things you actually had in your package.
You might win a few votes for honesty and you know, self-analysis here, though, to show people that you understand what's actually happened.
I'm one of those party leaders. You know what often happens is when party leaders have bad opinion polls, they say, oh, I don't believe them or any of that. So you say, do you know what, it'll all be all right. I've said repeatedly, and I'll say again this evening, these are bloody awful polls for the Scottish Labour Party. I hope I'm allowed to say that sort of stuff on evening telly. They're good for the SNP.
You are, but I'm asking you...
They're good for the SNP and they're fantastic for David Cameron, because if this is repeated on election night, David Cameron gets to hang on as Prime Minister because the Labour Party lose seats in Scotland.
Since you won't give me your analysis, can I suggest to you that it could be that as a party you've misunderstood what seems to be the changing mood in Scotland, that Labour in the past few years has been too busy telling people what it thinks is good for it, rather than listening to the aspirations for Scotland and people's feeling that they want a stronger voice and they want to be able to do more for themselves?
I don't think that's fair. The fact is, I think there was a period a few years ago where people were aware what the Labour Party was against. They weren't clear enough about what the Labour Party was for, but no one can say that now. I mean, our manifesto, everyone accepts that our manifesto is the most ambitious and radical we've had for many years. The things on a higher minimum wage of £8 an hour, the abolition of exploited or zero-hours contracts, the idea that Scotland does well when working-class families do well, abolishing the need for food banks. In a country as rich as ours, how can it be right that a mum and dad, on the way back from work, walk past fully stocked supermarkets on the way to a food bank to be able to feed their children? Then we've got a plan to deal with that. It's a fully costed plan, and we're only a week away from the chance to implement that plan.
We also know is what you're against, very strongly against, is this second referendum that you go on about. You go on about it more than the SNP does. What happened to your pledge soon...
There is a reason why we go on about it more than the SNP.
What happened to your pledge soon after you were elected leader? That, and I quote, you wanted to make Labour a home for yes voters. You've just unveiled a poster slamming all the aspirations of these voters that you claim to want part of your home.
You saw the poster there. It was we're on a road to a fairer Scotland with Labour, all the things that I've just been speaking about and much more. No tuition fees, higher bus fares, 1,000 more NHS nurses. And we have a choice, really. We can have, in a week's time, the road to that fairer Scotland with Labour, or the road to a second referendum with the SNP. It's not negative to highlight the fact that the SNP said last year to yes voters and no voters in the referendum, it was once in a generation. 4 easy words to say, and for all the millions of words that Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond have uttered in this general election campaign, those are the 4 words that they can't repeat. And now if the SNP win the seats...
They've made it pretty clear that even if they win all 59 seats, which according to a poll today is even possible, they would not consider it a mandate for a second referendum.
Why won't they just repeat what they said in last year's referendum? People, I'm clear, this isn't a rerun of the referendum, this general election. I'm clear about that. That was last year's disagreement. This year's decision is whether we want David Cameron to stay or David Cameron to go.
Well, we can ask Nicola Sturgeon that.
But the Scottish Government were clear last year. They said very clearly it's once in a generation. Now, do you think these 100,000 new members the SNP have got are really going to who've joined the SNP since the referendum, they are really going to let Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon away with not having another referendum? You see the pressure from Jim Sillars and you see the pressures from us.
Can I just ask you, as a matter of interest, and it's not what the SNP are saying, but if the SNP did win seats in the kind of numbers that are being predicted at the moment, 50-odd, would that not actually be a mandate for a second referendum?
Well, that's a question you have to ask Nicola Sturgeon
tomorrow evening.
I'm asking
you.
I don't want our country to get involved in rerunning last year's disagreement.
Seriously, if Scotland sent that many democratically elected MPs representing the Scottish Nationalist Party to London, would that not be a mandate for thinking again about independence?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon, of course, and the SNP is saying it's not.
I'm asking you, though.
It's clear.
What would you say?
Well, we'll debate that next Friday after the election, of course. I'm not getting into what happens after the election. I'm campaigning for a better way of running our economy, a balanced way of reducing the deficit and ensuring that working class families can get on in life. Now, that's what my view and the Labour Party's passion is. We should spend the next few years trying to recover from so much of the damage over the past few years, rather than rerunning the referendum.
You're telling people what to think again. You're telling people what to think.
No, Sally, I hope you don't mind me saying this. In the opinion polls, it's clear. 1 in 3 SNP voters don't even want to have another referendum, and the vast majority of Scots don't want another referendum. And 1 in 3 Scots, with a week to go in the election, are entirely undecided about how to vote. So this isn't me saying, telling the people what to think. This is me asking the SNP to repeat what they told people who were yes voters and no voters in last year's referendum. It shouldn't be that difficult. The Labour Party's happy to commit that we will abolish the need for food banks, we'll increase the minimum wage.
Jim Murphy, let me put that aside for a minute and let me ask you this. Haven't you made a bit of a mess of the negotiations, of which there haven't been any, with the SNP?
I can't make a mess of negotiations that haven't happened.
What does happen after this election? First, there's to be no coalition, then there's to be no deal of any kind. Surely people actually want to see a kind of politics where there is cooperation of that kind.
But you accept we can't have messed up negotiations that haven't happened. But the SNP
the way
and the
that
Labour
you have
Party,
responded to the SNP
and the Labour Party have both said there's not going to be a coalition. There isn't going to be a deal. We believe in different things. We believe that we should spend the next few years doing different things.
So are you seriously saying you'd prefer to see David Cameron forming a government rather than Labour and the SNP cooperating?
What I worry about...
What are you saying?
What I worry about, and not for the Labour Party's sake, I worry on behalf of our country, that if the SNP win the number of seats that have been projected in these opinion polls, that's great for the SNP. It's fantastic for David Cameron, because with the election being so tight across the rest of the UK, David Cameron cannot win seats here in Scotland by himself. The Tory party can't win seats here in Scotland by themselves. They need someone else to beat the Labour Party for them. And in this election, my worry is that by voting for the SNP, we end up with a Tory government by accident, and that would be bad for Scotland. So
you are actually saying you'd rather see David Cameron in government than cooperating with the SNP.
I joined the Labour Party because I oppose everything that the Tory party stands for when it comes to economic policy. Every moment between now and the election, I'm going to work with Ed Miliband and the rest of the Labour Party to change our government, because our country needs to change. We need to end this Tory austerity.
Yes, but if
we need to end the need for food banks.
Forgive me though, this is a question about democracy. If the Scottish electorate chooses collectively to send that number of SNP MPs to represent them in Westminster, you would not consider talking to them, making arrangements with them that would keep the
of course the Labour Party
Conservative government out in the way that you both want.
Of course the Labour Party and the SNP would talk to one another, would negotiate with one another on the green benches of the House of Commons, but it'll be in the opposition benches. Because David Cameron gets to cling on to power. In every election...
Why so?
Well, when's the last time... When is the last time...
You know you can form a minority government.
When's the last time the leader of the party, who didn't lead the largest number of MPs, didn't form the government?
Well, you're going to tell me it was 1923?
No, 1924, nearly. But 1924, the last time this happened. Do we really want to stake the future...
Well, you're saying 1924 because in 1923 it did.
Do we really need to stake the future of our country, the welfare of our families, the investment in our NHS, and something that happened last 1924? That's a gamble that our country shouldn't take. So that the SNP have rolled out a coalition with Labour. Labour's rolled out a coalition with the SNP. You can't get a Labour government in a week's time by proxy, by voting for any of the other parties.
Why on earth are you going back to 1923 all the time? I mean, there's a first time for everything, and this is an election in which there are an awful lot of first times happening.
In this election, people have been told...
Something has changed here. Why should that not change too?
In this election, people have been told you can get a Labour government by voting against the Labour Party. It makes no sense whatsoever. You don't have to follow every twist and every turn of all politics to know that you can't get one thing by voting for the opposite. So if you really do want a change to Tory austerity, a better way of running our economy, only the Labour Party is big enough and strong enough. And what Scotland decides, if Scotland votes Labour, the whole of the United Kingdom will get a Labour government in just a week's time, because the polls are that close across the rest of the UK.
Let me ask you a last brief question. You mentioned the SNP's members earlier. Labour has just announced that it's got over 200,000 members in the UK, the highest in 15 years. Why are you not releasing the membership figures in Scotland?
Well, the Scottish Labour Party figures are about 20,000 and growing. We'd like to see more members during the campaign.
7,000 of these are social club members, of course.
We'd like to see more people joining the Labour Party. We're proud of our members. We're proud of all those hundreds of thousands of trade union members.
Do I take it from that you're not at a 15-year high?
We are actually, but over 20,000, but we're proud of the hundreds of thousands of trade union members in Scotland who also pay the political levy, and that's part of the broad church of the Scottish Labour Party.
Jim Murphy, many thanks.
Thank you.